I think this is like day 4. Like it's been I don't know. You know how like your body you feel like your body is resisting the inevitable. Little is it white blood cells? Which blood which I thought it was some like blood cells that are like little soldiers and like no F that. We're gonna take on these viruses and like they start resisting it, but then they get overwhelmed and then you get sick or something. Does that sound accurate or not at all?
Yeah, yeah, white blood cells are part of the body's immune systems.
Yeah,
And yeah.
my white blood cells, man, they keep losing. So I'll be telling them like, man up. And they're like, sorry, chief. Like, all right.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah. I mean, I'm not on my deathbed like I was the last time I got sick, where I thought I had COVID. I think I told you last time I was sick, I didn't have enough strength to stand in the shower. I used to have to take a shower sitting down on a chair. That's how bad it was.
Oh man.
Like they brought me down to my knees. It was that bad. But I did force myself to go bicycling like 8 miles yesterday before going to work. Trying to be like you. I'm trying to be like you and Goggins, man. Get hard.
No, I guess if I'm sick, I probably would be sitting in bed going, I don't want to live.
Hey, Roman.
Oh, that's an early.
Roman is like my one subscriber. We
Cool.
keep saying that we're going to like take one of these sessions and go in on a bottle, but I guess that would have to be like a holiday weekend or something where we both don't have to go to work half an hour later.
Yeah, well, it would just have to be either that or we do in the afternoon, like five
The
o'clock or
afternoon,
something.
the afternoon on the Friday, or are you talking about on the weekend?
Yeah, we're on the weekend,
I don't think I'll
evening
be
there.
able to do weekends. My weekends are too personal. I like literally having my weekend. All
Yeah,
right. You know, it's interesting though. When's the last time? Well, I don't think you tweet much.
yeah,
When's the
not
last time you
much.
actually tweeted about something technical? When's the last time you tweeted or wrote about something technical?
Tweeted or wrote about something technical. Man, I do not know. I want to look at my tweets. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. Retweeted some technical things, but man, I don't know. It's been a long time. I want to say.
Roman says I mostly stay technical on Twitter, so very low tweet frequency for me. Yeah, yesterday I was considering like, when's the last time I actually like contributed something technical that was thoughtful? Yeah, it's probably been like, mm, it's probably been like maybe 3 or 4 months. But I think it's official. I am no longer technically motivated about sharing my enthusiasm about software development. I'm not like I don't really care that much, and it's starting to show. At my job, I'll hear things that are like contrary to my philosophy. And I'm like, okay, like I don't even I don't even resist. I'm like, oh, really? Okay. Yeah. Where like if it was
Yeah,
5 years ago, I'm like, no, f that. you're wrong, and this is why. And I'll write a white paper, and I'll create all these examples, and I'm going in as if I'm like a defense lawyer. I don't care. Like, let people. It's not my money, so I feel like I'm going
Yeah,
to the other extreme, caring a lot about a customer's budget and how it's extremely risky to go down whatever path to. Well, they hired you, so they trust you, and all right, yeah, whatever.
yeah. I used to like when I first started software development. It was a lot of reading and trying to apply like everything that I learned and trying to bring people along. But it was always really hard to like find people who just like had that sort of like where you jived with it and they
Fire.
understood what you were trying to do and you all could talk like you know cogently about it or whatever. And then I think I somewhere's about in the middle of my last gig I realized that I just to kind of like let it go and do my
Yeah,
not to forget the practices but just do them and then just don't and try to suggest to other people but not be really like go into it and write like oh you must do this or this is the direction and being very opinionated about it. I kind of take the approach now it's like well if this all works and it otherwise passes like there's no bugs and there's passes kind of the smell test for standard .NET development or something. I'm just like whatever, okay. Although there's times where there's design things like one of the ones that we had was like somebody put caching in recently. Somebody put caching in like 2 layers deep, and it's like, well, if you put caching here, then that means that consumers of that have no option for caching to not cache. And if you move that up to the edge of the application, then where the actual usage is, then any consumers of this interface can then. And so it's like little things like that I'll still call out for design, but I was very going very hard at my last gig about like I don't want to ever see a null reference exception again, and so we're going to do everything very explicitly with maybe types and stuff like that. And people just didn't get it at first. Actually, I don't think they ever got it. It's like it's nullable. It already has. It's already like a maybe type, but you forget to check the null. Is the problem.
yeah.
So
I've had the same arguments where oh, don't worry, we can throw this exception because our client code already has a handler for it. Yeah, but your method is public, which means that in theory, in theory, you don't really know who all of your clients could be moving in the future. And we kind of write software for the future. We kind of write software for it to be reusable. Sometimes we don't know how it's going to be used the way that we intended, but yeah,
yeah.
you don't know your clients if you declare it public. If you do know your client, should it really be public? Which is more philosophical, right? Like anyway,
Why do we write it for reusability? Like, how many times have you actually had software where you go, I can I can reuse this? Like, there's not very many times. It's always something new. And
automated tests.
the first time you write something, you're always like, oh, I'm gonna make it better, or like, the first time you write it, it sucks anyway. So that by the time you return to something that you could reuse, you're already like in the mood to rewrite it because you're like,
So
this way would be better.
so I think when you're doing setup for something that is a important operation, I think those tend to be candidates for code reuse. Um, when you write unit tests or some integration tests, I think those are prime examples of clients that would take advantage of the setup that um, you continuously rely on across tests. Roma says, I do not write for reusability anymore. I write it for the current use case. Every factor when I find second, third use case for the code.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of leaning towards, Roman, is that we do a lot of work to do that. And then the other thing is too is uh, like if you find duplication, there's like this desire to like, oh, don't repeat yourself, remove the duplication and stuff like that. But removing duplication creates coupling. Like that's what it does. It's a trade-off. It's never a free thing. It's like it's not inherently good to remove like or universally good, I guess, to remove um, duplication. So it depends on what you're removing and
So
why.
if you if you write your code as if it's not going to be reused, why? What do you think are the consequences? What do you think are the code smells that are typical or consistent when someone adopts that philosophy of writing code? To me, it's usually code that in which the lines of code that you're looking at typically aren't the absolute essential necessary code to accomplish whatever you're trying to accomplish. Um, and I would say that the other part is it becomes code that's harder to work with if you're working on a complex problem that involves other minds, other contributors. It's harder to provide I would argue a an example or a code snippet that does something that other people need to do. I don't know. I just see usually that it's worth the investment of taking something that is for the public and writing it so that it could be somewhat plug and play for others.
Yeah, I guess maybe it depends on the kind of software you're writing. It's like if you're writing like a reusable component that does some sort of algorithm or something, like a cryptographic library or a JSON parser or something like that. Yeah, I mean that all makes sense. But like when you're writing just line of business apps and you're basically doing like CRUD with a little bit of like maybe a little bit of logic on top of it, it's like it's like there's really no point in thinking about reusability.
When it
It's not.
comes
It's
to
usually very specific the context, right? It's like at
when it
this
comes to a
moment
data
in
access
time.
layer,
Well,
you're
yeah,
saying because those are a lot of examples that I see where it's like, oh, don't worry, our client provides a exception handler for this. Well, yeah, but do you, if it's public, is it 100% safe that you are going to be the author of your clients? Why is it public?
you mean public to the world, or
Yeah, why is it declared why does that method have a public modifier on it? Why is it declared public if the way that you're talking is internal and you know the internal implementation details of why the client calls it and what are the cases for it not working and how the client resolves those scenarios. So I consistently have, with emphasis on consistently, have these discussions of like, why is it public if you already are intimate with the client implementation details and you're perfectly okay with it throwing the exception when you don't have to. So
like I guess if it's not public, how do you use it is the thing. But um, but regardless, I mean that's kind of like the Microsoft model though of how they write their libraries. At least they used to. I don't know if they're still doing it that way, but a lot of their most of their libraries throw exceptions when anything happens. that's not really exceptional, but even expected, right? So
You're talking about C sharp.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. Like we're at a new age now. Unfortunately, it'll take
Well, .NET
another
in general, but
20 years for developers to say, yeah, managing this as a result of an operation instead of barfing up an exception, yeah, this seems more manageable.
yeah, really, like exception is just like an out to say I don't know what the fuck to do here. It's just like I don't know what
That's the way I view
the
it.
fuck. It's like, well,
It's like drop,
yeah,
barf.
yeah. I realize that I only use exceptions when I want to be lazy. That's about it. Like intentional laziness. It's like I don't want to have to think about the what to do with this, so I'm just gonna throw the exception and I'll figure it out later.
So to be fair, I use exceptions when I have an if condition that right before I assume that this operation can be done because the conditions are supposed to be the conditions are supposed to exist in order for this operation to even be possible. But in my pre-checks, if I have pre-checks, usually I try to constrain the method signature to be qualified to even call it in the first place, kind of like as a state machine.
Yeah, well,
Um,
that's
if I realize that one, I'm not the author of everything that led up to this method being invoked, and so they literally pass in like integers and strings and not like a qualified state that you literally have to have in order to invoke it, then yeah, that's when I throw an exception like this this method can't do anything at all without this stuff really existing. And then I'll just say barf because I think it really is exceptional. Or like divide by zero or something.
yeah. But I mean, even divide by zero is a like a lazy exception, right? You could have division in always return, you know, but it's like you don't want to have to handle it, right? So that's the thing.
Well, with mathematics, like what else besides dividing by zero is exceptional? I can't think of anything. You have
No, I mean,
imaginary numbers, but it's still like within the business case of mathematics.
yeah, but the problem is that we have constrained types too. So we don't have infinitely sized numbers in at least in
Within computer science or
not
within
within.
the CPU or what is it? Is it
Well, I'm talking
ALU?
about like
Arithmetic logic unit. And you like how I pulled up that community
yeah,
college ALU?
yeah. No, what I mean is uh you can get overflow uh, errors. Not overflow. Like, oh gosh, what's the term for it? Um, uh, Basically, you go from you reach the bound of the integer value, and if you add more to it, um, you cycle to the negatives because you go up above the
I thought it was
signed
called
value.
like
So there's
floating point overflow or something like that.
yeah, it's like it's a there's a operator in C sharp called like checked or something like that where you can check for integer overflow or whatever. I can't remember exactly what the term is, but that's another divide, kind of like divide by zero thing you can get with doing numeric operations. I don't think you can get that in Python. Their numbers go up for like
But
indefinitely.
you don't get that in C sharp. Like
Yeah, you
if
do.
you no you don't. If
If you do
you
checked,
if
yeah,
you
you do.
do if you do 100 divided by 3, in theory you should get an overflow, right? Because that my math sucks. If the answer is like dot 6666 with a bar over the 6, it just
Well,
keeps
yeah, but
going, right?
that's integer division, right? I'm talking about addition, like not
If
division.
if you have a float or a double of 100 or 100.0 divided by 3.0, in theory, whatever the math is, I thought it was like .666 or .333, whatever that math is, it should go on forever. But it doesn't. You're not going to get an exception when you do that.
No, that's not what I'm talking about though.
But I'm
I'm
saying
talking
that
about
it handles it in C sharp, where in theory you should expect that that arithmetic or that floating point overflow, whatever you want to call it, but it doesn't happen because the runtime somehow accounts for it. So Roman says, "Yep, exceptions for me. Crash now. Can't deal with it. Like abandon this request, whatever, and bail. Or in the case of a desktop app, crash it. In C sharp, you can ask for check math. As far as I know, as a compiler flag on a per file level area with some construct I do not remember."
hold on.
If I do 100.0 divided by 33, or is it 33 or 3? 3.0. Yeah, so this just does 3333 or 33 dot, then a whole bunch of threes afterwards.
Here, I'll show you what I mean. And yeah, it is. It's something you turn on. You can turn on to have an exception thrown. Um, Technically, in those arithmetic logic units, they'll have a flag that gets a side effect. Usually, that when you overflow like this, it pops a value into a register, letting you know. So it's like it's flagged. Um,
Okay.
uh, see, screen two. So I want to share. Do you see a .NET Fiddle?
Did I see what?
Oh yeah. So I'm sharing my screen now. See,
Oh, okay. Hold up.
actually, I should just why did I do it like
Yeah.
that? So if you have, um,
Oh, I've never seen that construct before.
you do check here. Um, so what this will do is throw this arithmetic overflow in the event that you reach the bounds of the integer value, um, and then you go above it. So if you don't have this on, what happens is that you get, see, it goes to the negative because you're setting the leading zero in assigned integer. But if you have checked on, then it will make sure that you don't go above or outside that bounds with arithmetic overflow. Yeah. So yeah,
Oh,
you're
you.
right, Roman. It's a flag. I couldn't remember if it was by default and then you turn it off with unchecked, or because I think unchecked is also an option. So you could have a checked region and then explicitly unchecked within that region. But yeah, that's one of those like little known C sharp things that doesn't really get used much.
I've never heard of .NET Fiddle.
Oh
I
yeah,
tend
this
to
is awesome.
I tend to just write a unit test to try to figure out what something looks like.
Yeah, so if you like want to share something with somebody to demonstrate something like this, .NET Fiddle is like really awesome to use because then you can just um, set it up and then send them out a. I guess I kind of flubbed there changing it, but you can basically write it up and then just send it out and share it, and then people can be like, oh yeah, I get that. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll write like if I have a very specific bug where something happens where it's not easy to explain to someone, but like the code could explain it, I'll just write up a little code in here. Um, like the last thing I wrote up was, have you ever had because I had a bug in production because I was stupid. And have you ever had the problem with going over an enumerable twice? Problem, like because yeah,
Going over an enumerable twice. Oh,
yeah,
dude. Like you talking about like a for each loop or something like that?
Yeah, so I'll show you the example of the actual issue I ran into, and it became really obvious to me after I did it that I'm like just stupid. Um, so if you have like a class called, let's just say like and do like sorry, let me think of a better one. Well, I'll just you have like an array of things, right? Like integers. I'll just say it's gonna be dumb, but sorry, I'm trying to think of this on the fly. And then you have something like a class, and you're going to do a mapping statement on it. So, man, I'm slow this morning.
Don't you miss
Something like
intelligence?
this. Yeah, it's the only kind of downside of this thing is that you have to do, you're writing it all out like that. Okay, so let's say you have something like this where you have, you do select, then you create like a mapping of some array. So um, right, so now you've got this Scott's array, right? So every time that you create a for each on this, you're creating a new um, version of these objects, right? And that's kind
Yeah.
of the fundamental problem here is that this enumerable isn't realized into some new base. So anytime you create a for each, you're always starting with this base 1, 2, 3, and running through um, this sub procedure, and you can notice that by doing this and adding like a so if I do a for each, this should return 1, 2, 3, and then if I do another for each, it's another 1, 2, 3, right? I don't have to do anything. So
Yeah. I
yeah,
think I
1, 2, 3,
understand
one,
that.
two, three, right? So um, whereas if you do it like this, you like realize the array or the enumerable, then it's this just one time. Um, so this is what happened to me is that I had something like this where I was returning an enumerable, and then downstream, and I originally had it like realized as an array or something like that, and then it was but like the stupid um, static analysis was like, don't use an array as a public class, and I'm like, oh shit, okay, I'll just make it a enumerable, screw it. But I didn't realize it behind it. I just left it as this map like this, and usually I'll tack on a to list or to array on the end here. I really want that just something that's like realize or something like that, where
Well,
it's just
is this not basically what we're talking about? Lazy or laziness?
in terms of what?
realizing like when you declare a set of items, but it doesn't really get loaded into memory until like
Oh
there's a
yeah,
dependency on it.
yeah, that's what it is. So this doesn't actually run until you start iterating through it, which is part of the benefit of having the enumerable chains is that you can create the entire like collection of what should happen, but not actually realize it until you're actually like until it actually gets like done or whatever until you actually use it in some context. So
Uh,
um, which is good, but it's also bad if you do something like this where in the code somebody was downstream, they went and did this, they mutated it, which is the problem is actually in the mutation, not in this. But because this mutation was being done against these items in this list, the next time that you called it, um, that mutation doesn't actually take, right? So, um, so
yeah.
this, even though I set them all to false, it's true because I'm not actually operating over the collection. I'm operating over something within a pipeline of changes here. So if I don't store it back into it, and obviously the correct way to do this here would probably be to do something with another select statement that does the mutation, right? Let's do like that select. I mean, and that's still like mutating. You should just create a whole new version. Could do that, right? Um, oh, so, anyways, yeah, that bug caught me. I forgot how I even got on this train, but oh yeah, I was trying to explain this double enumeration and why it was a problem to someone. It's like I just have to demo it. So I created up a very simple example um, that described exactly what this issue was. It's like, here's the first iteration. It's doing a mutation. This one, it's not. Oh, yeah, what it was is doing like a time zone conversion. That's what it was.
Mm.
So, gosh, I felt stupid afterwards because you know what? Have you ever done this? Like, and you, I tell myself every time this happens that next time I'm not going to do it. It's like you see something and you're like, that must be that's not my bug. That's just a bug in the system already. And then you just like you don't go in and like investigate it anymore. You're just like there's no way this could be related to this. Like I know I shouldn't do that. It's happened, but that was one of these situations. So I noticed that the date was in the future, and I'm like, well, technically it's always in the future for me because they always convert it to Eastern time zone, and I'm in Central. So um, this doesn't seem that odd to me. But maybe this is always this way, and maybe so people just get
Denial.
this date. Yeah, but see, then I had a feature flag, and I'm like, well, I'll sure turn the feature flag off. I'm like, okay, well, it works the same in both. Um, but that's because I wrote an adapter to behind the feature flag to switch between the two, and that adapter contains that flat mapping into an enumerable, and so that mutation downstream was getting, even though there's a feature flag, was getting applied incorrectly in both contexts. So I had to go add a to array in each of them. It's like,
Or feature flags like a cutting edge concept with people that you work with.
no, we got feature flags all over the place. Actually, we probably have got there's like some cleanliness that we should probably focus on having with feature flags, but no, it's pretty well an accepted practice here to use it.
You ever
I still struggle sometimes explaining like working with QA and being like, okay, so what we're doing here is we're gonna feature flag this, and we're not turning it on in production right away. So all you technically need to test is that the feature flag, when you turn it on, the new thing happens. You turn it off, it doesn't, and that I didn't break anything when it's off. Like you don't need to test the actual feature behind that because we're not like we're not doing that yet. We still have more work to do. Sometimes that's still a bit of a struggle to get them to scope testing just to around the feature flag, or to get people to accept that you can just test feature flag and that's it.
Uh, you know what? I just, as many times as it happens, I shouldn't be surprised, but it just boggles my mind that it's even accepted. Is like obviously I work as a contractor and not a full time employee, so I bounce around from shop to shop. It still boggles my mind that in like 2022 there are entire development shops or software development shops that still don't know how to write automated tests. And I'm talking about senior developers, everybody, right? And it
Okay,
just
so
boggles my mind.
do they not? Okay, so when you say write automated tests, do you mean they don't know how to do it, and or are they just not doing it because they don't find value, or are they doing it not doing it because they're lazy, but they know how to do it? Because I know
What
how to effectively like how to write an automated test, but
do
there's
you?
a lot of work that goes into it to actually make that happen.
Do you think that you qualify as the technical authority on writing automated tests?
No, no, I'm not
Okay.
the technical authority, but I
All
know
right.
how to. You know.
So the reason why I asked that question is it's usually a set of phases, right? It's this doesn't require the overhead of writing tests. Like, okay, well, I don't really see you use leaning on the compiler to enforce specific policies that the compiler will catch in regards to quality issues. Like in regards to business policies, I don't see you leaning on the compiler to do that. And like, I'm like, all right. But then, a bug will happen. Right? We all write bugs, and we're like, well, we should probably make sure this bug never ever happens again, right? Because that's usually the gateway to try to get some testing. And make a long story short, I find that shops will say they know how to write tests, they choose not to, but when you start pressing them, they finally like acknowledge that they don't have that skill set. And it's always like a journey to get to the truth of why they don't do something that they claim that they choose not to do. That's
Yeah,
I
but
found that.
it might be like weaponized incompetence. Like that's kind of like a thing. It's like because I want to say that like sometimes I'll feign being like I don't know how to do it, but it's not that I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to do it in a way that what I'm saying when I say I don't know how to do it is that I don't know how to do it in a way that doesn't suck ass to do. Like it takes forever, and then I don't feel like it's adding any value, and it's
Yeah.
not like if my job was to spend time writing tests where I could build up like a significant framework and like that, and then when it gets into unit tests, it's like see those I find again unit tests at the actual unit level, like
And that's the
the
part
method
that
level. That's the part I just can't stand because it's like this doesn't add value. It just
and that's the
adds
part that
overhead.
requires like a technical authority figure, right? Because the technical authority figure would say there's no value in writing this automated test that's not exposed at the surface level, right? Like there's no value in writing a test for implementation detail. There is value in writing a test that tests a behavior that's exposed at the point of contact of the interface.
Yeah.
So what I found is oh yeah, 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 it's too much overhead. And then I'm like, flag. Why is it too much? Yes, there is overhead, but what is causing them to say it's too much overhead? And what I found in my experience is they'll try to use like a mocking framework with the emphasis on try.
Hmm.
And even for me, like the implementation details of how they attempt to employ some mock framework, it looks so cryptic. And like I find that their test is doing absolutely nothing because of their reliance on this mocking framework that they don't really understand like its intended use, and neither
So
do
I mean,
I.
can you give an example, like, because I like, I mean, mocking frameworks and how to use them seem pretty obvious to me. It's like you're creating a mock implementation of something, and then you're defining its behavior, the behaviors that it does that you want to test your response to. Um,
So an example would be I'll see a mocking framework that for a method given these two or three uh, inputs or parameters, it returns like a bool, and then within the unit test, they'll they'll use like mock like MOQ or something,
yeah, mock, yeah.
and then they'll literally like test that method y- by using that mocking framework to just return a bool. Like it's not testing anything. It's not testing like anything inside of the code. It's not doing anything. They're just. I feel like they're literally just writing a test to check something off and using a
Yeah.
mocking framework that doesn't accomplish anything.
So it'd be an example of what you're saying is like, if the behavior is that this method returns the result of this delegate method, basically, and they mock the delegate method to return true, and then verify that the method returns true.
Yes, that's exactly.
Yeah, but I mean, technically, you are testing that it returns the result of that thing, um, or that the behavior is expected. I suppose somebody could come in later to,
It's not
but
because you're.
that's the thing is it's so simple. Like, what do you like if you break it down to that simple level? Like, there's no, like, it's very obvious that that's going to happen. Why do you need to test it?
No, 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 no. They're literally within like the mock framework forcing a true to be returned instead
Hmm.
of given the parameters letting that method expose a true result, right? There's a difference. Like, are you really testing business logic or are you just writing code that does something that really is completely separated from what you're trying to test? And it's the latter part. And it becomes complex. It becomes unneeded conversations. It's like why did we even take the time to write this stuff if
Well,
it
yeah,
really
but that
has no value?
and that's
If you
that's when you that's what I'm saying is once you get into like having these chains of dependencies that you have to resolve, that's not self-contained. You like you these values don't these things don't have a lot of value. Like, to me, if it's doing IO and that's what you're testing, there's pretty much no value to the test at all. Like,
I
of course
I
stuff is going to fail. Of course it's going to return, all sorts of shit that you're going to have to handle. Um, you're not going to probably write everything to handle every response case because, you know, you can't know every exception the library is going to throw and all of that kind of thing. But that being said, like, to me, unit tests are useful when you want to separate out a very specific like method that has very like has business logic in it that you want to verify you got right, and it's just purely like functional code. It's not where the inputs always map to the same outputs and there's no mocking required whatsoever because it's a function.
oh so here's a counterexample. view models and controllers. All right. To me, my philosophy is just unit test the what's exposed on the primary interface of what work needs to be done. Controllers and view models. I don't care about any of the deeper classes that ultimately get whose methods or operations get triggered. I just care about the behavior of the controller and view models. And it's not purely functional, right? Because what happens on the view model is you execute a command. The consequence of executing that command is that a property gets mutated. And then you
Hmm.
assert that that property on that view model is of whatever value that you think it should be, right? So it's not really functional, but because you execute this test on this command, or yeah, on this command, this property up here changes, right? With a controller, it's kind of the same thing. I think instead of like commands, you just have public methods that you execute. But in theory, you're verifying that the properties have been mutated as a consequence. And
Yeah,
so,
but what I mean
but
is
I don't care about any
yeah,
if it's not so through a view model or a controller, like inherently the logic for triggering IO occurs, but I don't really care about that stuff. I only care about because I invoke this specific operation, this property just gets mutated to what I expect. And
yeah.
that's
But
it.
what if it's the result of that IO operation? So you could imagine something
It
where you
is.
trigger a command to send an email, and the email can succeed or fail, and that will set a something that indicates in the UI that the send was successful or failure, right? You need to mock out whether that email was successfully sent or not to be able to write out to test both scenarios, right?
You need to mock it out, yes.
Yeah. So
It
there,
depends on but it depends on what is the system under test. If you're testing like a if you're testing like the point of contact of a UI depending on a controller or view model, like you're not testing that emails get sent. You're testing that
yeah.
your property is going to be of this value. So in theory, during data binding, your UI is going to resemble whatever state.
So what you're saying is, because I've seen tests that are like, verify that this is called, and it's like I don't want to verify that that was called. I don't even want to verify that the correct arguments were passed because technically that dependency until you integrate with it, you don't know how it's going to respond, and that those parameters are even the correct parameters to pass in
Yeah.
all the time. So yeah,
So the way that I test that
or
is,
arguments rather.
I mean, the IO stuff, like you inject like a a mock of that interface, and
Yeah,
then
and that's what mock is used for. MOQ.
well, I don't use mocking frameworks. I just hand roll. I literally write a class called my mock XYZ that implements I XYZ interface, and
So
then
you're not being very efficient then, because that's like way less efficient than using mock. Like mock is super, and especially if you use auto mock too on top of mock,
mhm.
man, it's so simple. Like you just say,
it
hey, give me this thing, and it just makes it for you.
well
Then you can say, set up this to return this. Okay, great.
uh, okay. I think it's a trade off because based on what I see, your setup, test, verify, and if we're talking about integration, teardown. Whenever I see mocking frameworks employed within a unit test, it takes me longer to figure out what that unit test is attempting to accomplish. Those are facts for me, right?
Oh,
Relying on if they're relying on a mock framework, I see a lot of like scaffolding that isn't necessarily intuitive upon first look of a unit test that I expect to be less than like 7 lines of code.
fair
If
enough.
I
If you do the setup though in like a initializer or something like that, or in another method, so that you don't have to do in the test because you could do
Yeah,
a
yeah.
yeah, you can do the same kind of setup. Um, you just don't have to create the classes and all of that kind of stuff.
Oh
So you can
yeah,
say if this pass in, return this. If this, return this.
yeah.
Yeah.
I could get behind that, but in practice, that's not what I see.
Hmm.
in practice, I see like in practice, I see like this mock thing take up maybe 2, 3 lines of code, right? And maybe it could be done in one, but in practice, the way I see it implemented with maybe teams that aren't very mature in their automated testing, uh, I don't know, responsibilities or know-how. Like I usually just see a lot of scaffolding
Hmm.
that isn't really clear on what they're trying to accomplish.
Gotcha. Roman agrees with you, so maybe I'll try hand rolling again next time and see how it feels. Um, I guess maybe too that if it's hard to hand roll the mocks, maybe that's a smell too, that it's just like the design's overcomplicated. That you could abstract out a lot of stuff. Because auto mock is useful when you have like a number of things that you have to inject into a constructor to make the whole class work. Um, because it'll just create all of those things for you. But that's probably a smell too, where your class is doing way too much if you've got to inject a shit ton of things just to get it to work. Logging, on the other hand, it makes not having to think about mocking a logger pretty nice.
Let me
But
read through stuff. I'm pretty okay on writing tests and get into existing code bases without existing tests. Mock frameworks are only on my last resort list, trying to avoid it most tests. I usually go Scott's route with manual mocks, but I only have very few mocks, like some IO mocks. Yeah. The
do
rest I
you
run with production code. So these manual mocks are usually way easier to read than they list. Yeah. So I have like a dedicated library or project within my solution called a test API, and I
Mhm.
just dump like I have a static mock class, and then my properties are some user login, some account number, some email address. It just makes things way easier,
Hmm.
right? But then I'll have a separate class within that mock library called mock favorable login, mock unfavorable login, which will either throw an exception or return something
Gotcha,
that's
gotcha. So you're
unfavorable.
actually naming so so you could use mock MOQ to do this. Um, if you wrote like so you could achieve the same thing if you wrote like a set of extension methods to mock that
Yeah,
actually describe what the mock is trying to accomplish, like you said, where you could do a like um, mock blah 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 service dot or mock dot you know mock sorry I'm trying to remember it's like mock order service dot setup uh, unfavorable result or whatever, some description of what you're trying to actually, and then within that you could actually write to use mock to actually set up all of the input output conditions on the
yeah,
without having to actually like within the method do like a well if this is the case then do this, if this is the case do this, if this is the case then do this. um,
yeah. And so even in my so within my imports or my using statements, I'll say like using static, you know, my mock, or I mean, I literally call it mock. So I'll say using static, whatever prefix to a namespace dot mock, right? Because mock is the name
mm-hmm,
of the class. And then within the setup of a automated test, then I can just say some this, some that. So some login, some message, some whatever you want to call it. I use the naming convention of some as a prefix for everything,
oh,
so
okay,
that yeah.
so you're saying
So
that
the emphasis is not on what sum is because sum doesn't matter. It's just an abstraction. right? Some input, we don't care if the input is numbers or letters. It doesn't matter because that's not what the test is about. The test is about specifically blah blah blah, and those are things that I don't rely on the mock class for. I literally have like a hard coded value because that is what the test is focused on.
Hmm.
So
Do you ever do you ever write the actual like integration tests at the like where you're actually doing IO with some external thing and but you're mocking that external thing in some way. So example of is that
no.
like you're actually mocking an HTTP request, but you're doing it on the other side of the HTTP call. Um, gosh, I'm probably explaining this really badly,
As an
but
integration test.
yeah, or more,
Um,
it's more of a component test, I suppose, than an integration test, but a full
let me try
component.
to let me try to rephrase it. Are you asking, given third party libraries that I don't have access to, but IO that I do have access to, do I find myself doing integration tests faking the third party stuff that I don't control while still executing the parts that I do control or that is easier
Yeah,
to control? Yeah, so I
yeah,
thought Microsoft had like fakes, right? Which I don't use, but I think it's a feature that they have specifically for that
yeah. I'm
to
trying
mock
to
out
remember
things.
the yeah. There's a
It's some,
library that we used. I can't remember what the hell it's called now.
I'm sure Roman has some feedback on there. We use mock against framework. I'm forced to use that. I usually only use mock against a framework I'm forced to use, and the framework has super chatty dependency chain like interfaces.
Yeah, it's Mount Bank. I think is the name of the thing. Yeah, Mount Bank. So it's like so if your thing is making like an HTTP request to like get some data or trigger some command or something on another remote system, you like define the actual HTTP request and response as a separate like thing. And so your app actually makes those HTTP requests, but it's talking to a totally fake version of the API that you're trying to reach. Um,
Yeah, and we're talking about C sharp, right?
well, this could
Um,
be anything. I
the
mean,
same
but
thing can be accomplished not creating a formal, like if you hand roll it, in which I typically do, you formally write a mock class. But in theory, you can do the same thing using an action or a func, or in a couple or 3 weeks ago, you were talking about the use of a delegate, right?
yeah, action functions are delegates. They're just generic delegates.
Well, okay, yeah, because that makes sense.
Yeah,
I just know that there's three like declarations to accomplish the same thing almost.
yeah, 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 because it's a generic. I guess what I'm saying is like maybe here's a very simple thing is do you ever actually hit a real database when you're doing your tests?
As in a database that I don't control.
No, even that you do control.
Yeah, if the database is in a dev environment or a test environment, yes.
Yeah, so you have automated tests that spin up the database, and so you are doing like full component testing, right? At that point.
There's times that I have, yes.
Okay. But do you ever like publish messages to like Rabbit or to Kafka or something like that, or Azure Service Bus and test like that,
Yes.
actually sending it?
Yeah.
Yeah, how did
I do that with
yeah.
beach delivery and then I tear it down.
Yeah, so do you write your tests for those? Do you still write them using like an in-app integration test then?
I
Like
write
do
as
you
it.
or do you have it as like a separate project that runs? So you start up your application and then you kick off another application that runs your tests. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure if I understand. So I have so let me try to answer your question. The short answer is no. I have designated integration tests that literally place messages on the bus and literally consumes messages off the bus.
Yeah.
Those types of tests, I instead of having set up test verify stages of a test, with those type of tests, I add a teardown stage as well, so that my test can run deterministically each time I run a suite of tests, right? So I delete or I clean the bus, wipe off all the messages off of it, so that subsequent tests are not affected. Right?
Yeah.
That's a short
You,
answer.
yeah. So you're running that as a it's not like you don't have a reference on your project, right? You're doing it. It's almost like you could just spin up a whole new app that just tests the thing, and then you have to spin up your app. Yeah, that's what I'm wondering, and that's where the mocking other services problem always gets me, is the pain, and getting the database even spun up and all of that action. Although containers have made that kind of easier to do because you can pretty much set up an entire, you know, integration testing area locally, uh, by
Well,
just
I
running
mean,
Docker Compose and poof, you're done.
I
But
have on my to-do list, and I started, but then I just got really busy. I don't know if you remember, but like I was going full throttle, not full throttle. I started my journey on Pulumi, which is
hmm
the infrastructure as code, using code. Who would have thought? And so I was going to use that to basically create Azure resources and manage those resources and tear them down, so that Beach Delivery would have um, not just a dev environment, but the other environments as well, test and prod. Because right now there's just one environment, and that's what I'm developing against. But
hmm
like if and when it finally goes into production, I can't continue doing the things that I've been doing, right? I need to preserve a prod environment. And the thought process was to use Pulumi to accommodate that, so I can spin up a dev environment, tear it down when I'm not using it to reduce my costs, my financial expenses. Same thing with tests, etc.
hmm
So something else that I do is and you kind of contributed to this, is I'll set a flag. So my unit tests can also be integration tests
hmm
by just sometimes just going into the remember maybe a year ago you had shared with me that you can do like pound debug, pound release, like whatever you want to name it, and then within your Visual Studio you can
Oh
run.
yeah,
Oh yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of use that where my unit tests I could just flip a switch and run it as an integration test, which means that it relies on different factories that produce, you know, different dependencies at
hmm
runtime. So I do that.
Gotcha.
It's,
So you have compile
it's
time. You can compile your same thing into two different. Yeah, that's kind of
yeah.
neat.
I mean, it's more overhead to more investment, but I just have less tests because it's the same tests, right? It
hmm
just requires more thoughtfulness
Hmm.
or requires more thought, should I say?
Yeah, I
Yep.
suppose because you just, instead of saying insert inject mock, and you basically set up the real thing. Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be kind of neat. Because there isn't any reason, if you have like a class that says set up login, that you can have it either set up a mock or set up the real database state or whatever. Um, but
Yeah, kind of like I would argue, again, it's more scaffolding, but it's I feel as if it's really targeting your system
hmm
regardless of its dependencies.
hmm.
So it maintains focus on what's being tested. instead of having different implementations for the same
Yeah.
system.
Well, we went over now, so probably should get. Are you working then, being sick, or are you taking days off?
Nah, I'm working. So,
You still happy with your current gig?
uh, let me talk to you offline. See you, Roman.
All right, see you.
No, I'm about to talk to you offline.
Yeah.